The encounter, the void between stars held its breath as Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the human vessel Resilience, watching the approaching fleet through the main viewport. 12 sleek ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian against the cosmic backdrop. They were beautiful in their own way, she had to admit. The Zephyrian Empire had always prized elegance in their designs. "Captain, incoming transmission," announced Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. "They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies." Sarah nodded, her weathered hands clasped behind her back. 3 years of deep space patrol had taught her patience, but something about this encounter felt different. The Zephyrians weren't supposed to be in this sector, and their formation suggested hostile intent rather than diplomatic contact. "Put it through," she commanded. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the proud face of Admiral Corax, his blue-tinted skin marked with the ritual scars of a Zephyrian warrior. His 4 eyes regarded the human ship with unmistakable contempt. "Human vessel," Corax began, his voice carrying the arrogant tone Sarah had heard too many times before. "You have wandered far from your little corner of the galaxy. This system belongs to the Zephyrian Empire. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences." Sarah stepped forward, her expression calm despite the tension building on the bridge. "Admiral Corax, I presume. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force vessel Resilience. According to the Galactic Accords signed 15 years ago, this system is neutral territory. We have as much right to be here as you do." Corax's laugh was harsh and grating. "The Galactic Accords? A piece of paper signed by weak species seeking protection from their betters. Look at your ship, human. A single vessel against my entire battle group. Your kind should have stayed on your mud planet where you belonged." The bridge crew tensed, but Sarah remained steady. She had faced this kind of arrogance before. The Zephyrian Empire had been expanding aggressively for decades, viewing younger species as obstacles to their dominance. What they didn't know was how much humanity had changed since their last encounter. "Dr. Webb," Sarah called to her ship's counselor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who also served as their diplomatic specialist. "Record this conversation for the historical archives. I have a feeling it's going to be significant." On the Zephyrian flagship, Tactical Officer Zara monitored her sensors with growing confusion. "Admiral, the human ship's energy readings are unusual. Their power core is generating massive amounts of energy, but it's contained in ways our sensors can't fully analyze." Corax waved dismissively. "Primitive technology compensating for inferior design. Prepare weapon systems. We'll make this quick." Back on the Resilience, Sarah watched the enemy ships begin to spread out in an attack formation. Her crew looked to her expectantly, waiting for orders. These men and women had served under her through countless missions, and she had never let them down. Arya ran a full tactical analysis. Sarah instructed the ship's AI system. "Zephyrian fleet composition analyzed, Captain," Arya synthesized. Voice responded immediately. 12 heavy cruisers, each carrying approximately 800 crew members. Their weapon systems are plasma-based, effective but predictable. Their shielding technology is approximately 2 decades behind current human standards. Lieutenant Park, the youngest officer on the bridge, looked surprised. 2 decades behind? "But sir, I thought the Zephyrians were considered one of the more advanced species." "They were," Sarah replied grimly. 15 years ago. They've been so busy conquering weaker civilizations that they forgot about innovation. Humanity, on the other hand, has been very busy indeed. The first plasma bolts erupted from the Zephyrian fleet, brilliant streams of superheated energy racing toward the lone human ship. Sarah watched them approach with the detached interest of a veteran commander who had seen this dance many times before. Shields to maximum, Return fire authorized, she commanded. Arya, implement Protocol 7. Acknowledged, Captain. Engaging adaptive defensive matrix. The plasma bolts struck the resilience and simply ... stopped. The energy was absorbed, redirected, and channeled into the ship's power grid. Not a single system flickered. The Zephyrian weapons, designed to overwhelm conventional shielding through brute force, were utterly ineffective against humanity's new adaptive technology. On the enemy flagship, chaos erupted. Impossible, Korax snarled. Our weapons had no effect at all. Zara's hands flew over her controls, her 4 eyes wide with disbelief. Admiral, their ship just absorbed our entire volley. Energy readings are off the charts. They're powering up weapon systems I've never seen before. All ships, concentrate fire on that vessel, Korax ordered. Destroy it now. The combined firepower of 12 Zephyrian warships focused on the resilience, turning the space around it into a maelstrom of destructive energy. The human ship sat motionless in the center of the storm, completely unharmed. Sarah turned to her weapons officer. Commander Reynolds, please demonstrate the difference between their technology and ours. Target their lead ship's weapon systems. Only, we're not here to commit genocide. Aye, Captain? Charging quantum pulse arrays. The Resilience's hull sections shifted and reconfigured, revealing weapon systems that seemed to bend space itself around them. Energy gathered in patterns that defied conventional physics, drawing power from the dimensional barriers between realities. The first quantum pulse lanced out, moving faster than light itself through folded space. It struck Korax's flagship with surgical precision, disabling every weapon system without harming the crew. Before the Zephyrians could react, 11 more pulses followed, each one perfectly targeted dot in less than 30 seconds. The entire Zephyrian battle group was defenseless. Report, Sarah requested coolly. All enemy weapons disabled, Captain, Reynolds confirmed. Their ships are intact. Life support is functional, but they couldn't swat a fly right now. The silence that followed was deafening. On 12 different bridges, Zephyrian commanders stared at their tactical displays in shock. The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had demonstrated such overwhelming technological superiority that resistance was meaningless. Admiral Korax's proud demeanor cracked like brittle glass. For the first time in his long military career, he felt true fear. How? He whispered. How is this possible? Sarah's voice came through the communications channel, calm and measured. Admiral, your ships are disabled but intact. Your crews are unharmed. I could have destroyed your entire fleet in the same amount of time, but I chose not to. Do you understand what that means? Korax's hands shook as he gripped his command chair. Around him, his officers waited for orders that he couldn't give. They were completely at the mercy of a species they had dismissed as primitive. Dr. Webb stepped forward on the Resilience's bridge. Captain, I'm detecting elevated stress levels across all Zephyrian vessels. Some crew members appear to be in shock. Expected, Sarah replied. Arya, open a channel to all Zephyrian ships. The AI complied, and Sarah's image appeared on every enemy bridge simultaneously. Her expression was serious, but not cruel, the face of a professional soldier who understood the weight of command. Zephyrian fleet, this is Captain Shun. Your weapons are disabled, but you are not prisoners. Your crews are safe, and your ships will be repaired once we've had a chance to talk. Admiral Korax, I'm extending an invitation for you and your senior staff to come aboard the Resilience under a flag of truce. We have much to discuss. Asterisk on the flagship, Tactical Officer Zara looked at her commander with desperate eyes. Admiral, what are your orders? Korax closed his eyes, feeling the weight of centuries of Zephyrian pride crumbling around him. When he opened them again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Signal the human ship. Tell them. Tell them we accept their invitation. As the Zephyrian shuttle made its way toward the human vessel, Sarah turned to her crew. I want full diplomatic protocols observed. These people just had their entire worldview shattered. How we handle the next few hours will determine whether we make new allies or create bitter enemies. Dr. Webb nodded thoughtfully. Captain, if I may ask, why did we develop such advanced weapons? The quantum pulse technology alone represents a quantum leap beyond anything in our previous arsenal. Sarah looked out at the disabled fleet, remembering the countless battles humanity had fought to survive in a hostile galaxy. Because we learned the hard way that being right isn't enough if you can't defend yourself. But more importantly, we learned that having the power to destroy doesn't mean you should use it. Lieutenant Park studied his displays, still trying to process what he had witnessed. Sir, the Zephyrian Empire has conquered dozens of systems. They've enslaved entire civilizations. Why are we showing them mercy? Sarah's expression softened. Slightly. Because that's what separates us from them, Lieutenant. Anyone can choose destruction. It takes real strength to choose redemption. The shuttle bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and Admiral Corax stepped onto the Resilience accompanied by his senior officers. They moved with the careful dignity of defeated warriors, their heads held high despite their circumstances. Sarah waited to greet them personally, flanked by her command staff. As the two groups faced each other, the weight of history pressed down on the moment. This was more than a military surrender. It was a potential turning point for the entire galaxy. Admiral Corax, Sarah said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome aboard the Resilience. I hope this meeting will be the beginning of a new understanding between our peoples. Corax looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out to accept it. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of his earlier arrogance. Captain Shun, we came here believing ourselves superior. We attacked without provocation, expecting easy victory. Yet you spare us when you could destroy us. I do not understand. Then let's find somewhere comfortable to talk, Sarah replied. I have a feeling this conversation is going to take a while. As they walked through the corridors of the human ship, the Zephyrian officers couldn't help but notice the differences. Where their vessels emphasized grandeur and intimidation, the Resilience was functional and practical. But beneath that utilitarian exterior lay technology so advanced, it seemed almost magical. They passed crew members from dozens of different species, all working together with easy familiarity. Humans, yes, but also Andromedans, Centaurians, and even a few reformed Zephyrians who had defected from the Empire years earlier. You employ our people? Corax asked, surprised. We employ anyone willing to work for peace, Sarah corrected. Merit and character matter to us, not species or origin. They entered a comfortable conference room, where refreshments from multiple worlds had been prepared. As everyone took their seats, Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out on Corax's face. Everything he had believed about humanity was being challenged. Admiral, Dr. Webb began gently, before we discuss current events, perhaps you could help us understand the Empire's recent expansion. Our intelligence suggests you've been unusually aggressive in acquiring new territories. Corax exchanged glances with his officers, then seemed to come to a decision. The truth is we're dying. Not immediately, but our sun is gradually cooling. Our scientists estimate we have perhaps 50 years before our home system becomes uninhabitable. The expansion isn't conquest for its own sake. It's survival. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Why didn't you simply ask for help? The Galactic Council has protocols for relocating endangered civilizations. Pride, Corax admitted bitterly. The Zephyrian Empire asking for charity? Admitting. Weakness? Our leaders would rather see the species die with honor than live as refugees. Lieutenant Park looked shocked. But that's insane, is it? Korax turned to face the young officer. Your people fought desperately against superior forces rather than surrender. You understand the value of pride. We fought for our freedom, Sarah corrected. There's a difference between defending yourself and attacking others. Zara, who had been silent until now, spoke up hesitantly. Captain Shun, if I may ask, your weapons technology, your defensive systems, how did humans advance so quickly? 15 years ago, you were barely capable of interstellar travel. Sarah smiled grimly. Necessity. When you're faced with extinction, you either evolve or die. We chose evolution. The conversation continued deep into the ship's night cycle, covering topics from stellar engineering to philosophy. Gradually, walls came down on both sides. The Zephyrians began to see humans not as primitive upstarts, but as a people who had transformed adversity into strength. The humans, in turn, recognized that beneath the Empire's arrogance lay a species facing extinction. As the meeting drew to a close, Admiral Korax sat back in his chair, looking older than his years. Captain Shun, I came here planning to destroy you. Instead, you've shown me that everything I believed was wrong. What happens now? Sarah stood, her decision made. Now, Admiral, we give your people something they've never had before. We give them a second chance. The words hung in the air like a promise, carrying the weight of possibility and hope. Outside the conference room's viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance. But something had changed in this small corner of the galaxy. 2 species that should have been enemies were about to discover that sometimes mercy was the most powerful weapon of all. The choice 3 days had passed since the encounter, and the disabled Zephyrian fleet still hung in space near the Resilience. But these weren't hours of imprisonment. They were days of revelation. Human engineering teams worked alongside Zephyrian technicians, not just repairing the damaged systems, but sharing knowledge that bridged the gap between their technologies. Captain Sarah Chun stood in the ship's main conference room. Watching through the viewport, his crew members from both species worked together on the hull of Admiral Korax's flagship. It was a sight she had never expected to see, and it filled her with cautious optimism. Captain, Dr. Webb approached, carrying a datapad filled with cultural analysis reports. The psychological evaluations of the Zephyrian crew are fascinating. They're experiencing what we might call cognitive reconstruction. Everything they believed about hierarchy, strength, and survival is being challenged. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. The question is whether this change will last once they return to their own people. Cultural transformation is never easy, especially for a species with such a rigid social structure. The door chimed, and Elder Vexus entered the room. She was the oldest member of the Zephyrian delegation, her pale blue skin marked with the deep lines of age and wisdom. Unlike the others, she had adapted to the new situation with surprising grace. Captain Shun, Vexus said, her voice carrying the formal cadence of a seasoned diplomat. I come with a request from Admiral Korax. He wishes to show you something. That may change your understanding of our situation. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the Admiral's private quarters aboard his flagship. The room was spartanly decorated, reflecting the military mindset of its occupant, but one wall held something unexpected, a holographic display showing a dying star system. This is Zephyr Prime, Korax explained, his voice heavy with emotion. Our home for over 3,000 years. Watch. The hologram shifted, showing the gradual dimming of the system's star over decades. Planets that had once been warm and vibrant were slowly freezing. Cities that had stood for millennia were being abandoned as the cold crept in. Asterisk. Our scientists initially estimated we had a century to find a solution, Korax continued. But the decline has accelerated. 50 years has become 30, maybe less. Billions of lives hang in the balance. Sarah studied the data, her expression grim. Have you tried stellar engineering? Fusion enhancement? Solar collectors? Everything, Korax replied bitterly. Our technology simply isn't advanced enough. We've watched our sun die a little more each day, knowing that conquest was our only hope of survival. Lieutenant Park, who had accompanied Sarah, looked shocked. Sir, with respect, this doesn't justify enslaving other species. Korax's jaw tightened. Easy words from someone whose world isn't dying. Tell me, Lieutenant, what would your people do if Earth's sun began to fail? Would you simply accept extinction? We'd ask for help, Park replied immediately. And if that help was denied? If the galaxy saw your desperation as weakness? The young officer fell silent, the weight of the moral dilemma settling over him. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, understanding the conflict he was feeling. Admiral, Sarah said carefully, what exactly are you asking of us? Korax turned to face her fully, and for the first time since their encounter, she saw hope in his eyes. Your technology is generations ahead of ours. If anyone could save our star, it would be humanity. I'm not asking for charity. The Zephyrian Empire has resources, knowledge, entire fleets that could serve the greater good instead of conquest. Elder Vexus stepped forward. Captain, here's something else you should know. Not all of our people support the current path. Many of us have spoken against the conquests, but fear and desperation have made our leaders deaf to reason. Sarah absorbed this information, her mind racing through the implications. Saving an entire civilization would require enormous resources and risk. But the alternative might be watching billions die or continue their destructive expansion across the Neo Galaxy. I need to consult with my crew, she said finally. This isn't a decision I can make alone. Back aboard the Resilience, Sarah called an emergency meeting of her senior staff. The conference room buzzed with tension as she laid out the situation. So we're being asked to save an entire species, Commander Reynolds summarized. A species that has enslaved dozens of others in their quest for survival. A species that's desperate and afraid, Dr. Webb countered. Fear makes people do terrible things, but it doesn't necessarily make them evil. Lieutenant Torres raised her hand. Captain, do we even have the technology to reignite a dying star? That's beyond anything in our current capabilities. Actually, Arya interjected, her holographic avatar materializing above the conference table. Theoretical models suggest it might be possible using quantum fusion cascades combined with dimensional energy extraction. However, it would require resources from multiple star systems and unprecedented cooperation. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the undertaking sank in. Sarah looked around the table at her officers, reading the mixture of hope and fear in their expressions. There's another factor to consider, she said. Intelligence reports suggest the Zephyrian Empire isn't the only aggressive expansion we're seeing. The hegemony of Krell has been making moves in the Outer Rim, and the Silicon Collective has begun converting organic worlds. We may need allies. More than we realize. Young Lieutenant Park leaned forward. Ma'am, if we help them, we could be creating the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. But if we refuse, they'll continue their conquests, growing more desperate and destructive. With each passing year, Dr. Webb finished, eventually they'll encounter a species that can match their military might, and the resulting war could devastate entire sectors. Sarah stood, moving to the viewport where she could see the Zephyrian ships. Each vessel represented thousands of lives, and beyond them lay billions more on worlds growing colder each day. Arya, what's your analysis of success probability? If we proceed with stellar rehabilitation, success probability is approximately 67%, the AI replied. However, If we include the cooperation of other advanced species and mobilize the full resources of the Galactic Council, that probability increases to 89%, and the probability of Zephyrian cooperation in ending their expansion? Based on psychological profiles and cultural analysis, 93% if their home system is saved, 12% if it's not. The mathematics were clear, but Sarah knew that decisions like this couldn't be made on numbers alone. She turned back to her officers. I want everyone's honest opinion. Commander Reynolds? The weapons officer considered carefully. From a strategic standpoint, it makes sense. A reformed Zephyrian empire could be a powerful force for stability. But we'd be gambling the lives of countless innocent people on the hope that they'll change. Dr. Webb? From a humanitarian perspective, we have to try. These people aren't inherently evil. They're survivors facing extinction. If we can address the root cause of their aggression, we might save not just their species, but all the civilizations they would otherwise conquer. Sarah nodded, then looked at Lieutenant Park. What about you, Lieutenant? You're the youngest officer here. This decision will affect your generation more than mine. Park swallowed nervously. Captain, I keep thinking about what you said earlier. Anyone can choose destruction, but it takes real strength to choose redemption. If we don't try to save them, how are we different from the people who would have let Earth burn? The simple wisdom of his words struck everyone in the room. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her young officer, and in the species they had raised him to think beyond the immediate tactical situation. Then we're agreed? She asked. We offer to help save Zephyr Prime with conditions. The vote was unanimous, too. Hours later, Admiral Corax and his delegation gathered once again in the human conference room. The Zephyrian commander's face was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the tension in his posture. He knew his people's fate hung on the next few minutes. Admiral, Sarah began, after careful consideration, humanity is prepared to offer assistance. In saving your home system. Corax's eyes widened, and several of his officers gasped audibly. You would do this? Asterisk, with conditions, Sarah continued firmly. First, all expansion activities cease immediately. Any occupied worlds with indigenous populations must be evacuated and returned to their original inhabitants. Second, the Zephyrian military will be restructured from a conquest force to a defensive one. Third, your empire joins the Galactic Council as a full member, subject to all accords and agreements. The room fell silent as the Zephyrians absorbed the terms. Elder Vexus was the first to speak. These conditions would require fundamental changes to our society, our government, our entire way of life. Yes, Sarah agreed. They would. The question is whether your people are ready to evolve, or whether they'll choose extinction over change. Admiral Corax stood slowly, his 4 eyes reflecting the internal struggle taking place within him. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but filled with emotion. Captain Chun, 3 days ago I came here to destroy you. I believed might made right, that the strong had the authority to take from the weak. You could have destroyed my fleet, but instead you showed mercy. You could have left us to die, but instead you offer hope. He paused, looking at each of his officers in turn. I cannot speak for our entire government, but I can speak for every person in this fleet. We accept your conditions. The formal ceremony took place on neutral ground aboard a Galactic Council station that had been hastily repurposed for the occasion. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness what many were calling the most significant diplomatic breakthrough. In galactic history, Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled delegates. Today marks not just an end to conflict, but the beginning of something unprecedented. The Stellar Rehabilitation Project will require the cooperation of multiple species, the sharing of advanced technologies, and a commitment to peaceful coexistence. That goes beyond simple treaties. Admiral Corax, now wearing the modified uniform of a Galactic Council member, stepped forward. The Zephyrian people have learned a hard lesson about the true meaning of strength. We offer not just our fleets in service of peace, but our commitment to becoming the guardians we should have been from the beginning. Asterisk, the project itself would take years to complete. Massive stellar engineering platforms had to be constructed, exotic matter harvested from the edges of black holes, and quantum fusion systems, more complex than anything previously attempted, had to be designed and built. But it worked. On the day the first quantum cascade ignited within Zephyr Prime's dying core, Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Resilience, watching the star slowly brighten on her tactical display. Beside her, Admiral Corax wept openly as his homeworld began to warm for the first time in decades. "Captain," he said, his voice thick with gratitude, "my people will remember this day for as long as our species exists. We will tell our children and their children about the humans who chose mercy over vengeance, who offered hope instead of despair." Sarah smiled, but her expression remained thoughtful. "Remember it, Admiral, but remember also that this was just the beginning. The galaxy is vast, and there are other species out there facing extinction, other desperate people making terrible choices. If we've learned anything, it's that isolation breeds fear, and fear breeds violence." Asterisk, in the months that followed, the alliance between humanity and the reformed Zephyrian Empire became the foundation for something unprecedented. A true galactic community. Species that had been enemies for centuries began working together, sharing resources and knowledge, not the hegemony of Krell. Seeing the success of cooperation over conquest, requested mediation to resolve their border disputes peacefully. The Silicon Collective, witnessing the Stellar Rehabilitation Project, offered their computational resources to help terraform barren worlds for refugees. Lieutenant Park, now promoted to commander, often reflected on that first encounter as he worked with mixed-species crews throughout the galaxy. The young officer who had questioned the wisdom of mercy had become one of its strongest advocates. "You know what I learned?" he told a group of new recruits during a training exercise. "Strength isn't about having the biggest weapon or the most advanced technology. Real strength is knowing when not to use them." Dr. Webb, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, found himself mediating disputes between species that had been mortal enemies just years before. His psychological studies of the Zephyrian transformation had become required reading at diplomatic academies across the galaxy. Asterisk. And on a small observation deck aboard the Resilience, Captain Sarah Chun often stood alone, watching the stars and thinking about the choices that had led to this new reality. The ship's AI, Aria, had calculated that their decision to offer mercy instead of destruction had prevented an estimated 47 interstellar wars and saved over 2 trillion lives. But Sarah knew the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in the hope that flickered in the eyes of young officers from a dozen different species, all working together toward a common goal. It was in the laughter of children playing in parks, on worlds that had been battlefields just years before. It was in the simple but profound truth that sometimes the greatest victories came not from destroying one's enemies, but from helping them become something better. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but for the first time in anyone's memory, it was also full of hope. And that, Sarah thought as she watched a mixed crew of humans and Zephyrians working together on the ship's hull outside, was the most powerful force in the universe. The alien fleet had met a human warship and begged for a second chance. Humanity had given it to them, and in doing so, had given the entire galaxy a chance to become something greater than the sum of its parts. In the end, that choice made all the difference.